Welcome back. So, if you've paid attention, you have learned a thing or two about the efficiency of a warm handoff. You can see the true value of an incoming lead generated by successful digital marketing. And as you probably already know, such a handoff is also possible with an existing network of successful projects. I call it welcoming people into your store as they come in. This is where we get to our first major obstacle, the error partly caused by our offshore location, meaning remote from our clients, and also in part by the lack of a cultural connection with the US. You see, there's a pattern that I've noticed working with multiple companies here in the offshore. And by the way, they were of different sizes. This is what it is. It is that we think we should be luring people into our store using any method possible, giving a low estimate, selling a junior developer as a senior, spamming left and right, and things of that nature. And all of it with an aching desire to just get that one lost soul and trick them into thinking they need one of our services. On the opposite, and it's quite natural, when you already have someone looking around in your store, you, as a salesperson, are then seen as a consultant rather than a sleazy car dealer. This is where I want to share the lack of vision that I noticed in our offshore sales. It's best represented by a debate on what to name a salesperson. You see, I've often heard from the offshore leadership, especially in smaller companies, that the term sales has a bad connotation, a stigma to it. So they name their salespeople business development managers, as if that could change the way a client sees them. This is where an accurate saying in Russian comes to mind. Как волка не назови, он все равно в лес смотрит. I'm sure you get the idea. It is not what you name someone who does your sales, but what position he's in when he's doing it. So if the environment is a store with a brand name and a value proposition, then a salesperson is automatically perceived as a consultant. If you're reaching out to me from an unknown company and I don't even know where you got my contact from, I'll just flag you as spam. Now let's talk about this vague word, a consultant. You see, language is a tricky thing. The word can be identical, but each person who hears it has a unique perception and image that the brain generates associated with that word. What I've noticed, and that's another error in our, let's call it post-Soviet culture, is that when you call a specialty shop, meaning specializing in, say, photography or woodwork, you most often get this person on the line who's going to be as condescending as possible when answering your questions. For some odd historical or cultural reason, this essentially salesperson wants to be seen as an expert by talking down at you, by playing the role of a know-it-all, by essentially being rude, thinking you'd agree to whatever he shouts at you. Again, the saying from a Russian folklore comes to mind, «Кто громче скажет гав, тот тогда и будет прав». And I've seen this approach not only in some random photography store, but in a large IT corporation as well. And while we're on the topic of critical cultural differences that relate to business ethics and create a business culture, I want to point out yet another assumption that prevails in the offshore post-Soviet culture. And that is a notion of deserving respect. It is ingrained in local culture that titles and personal experience don't mean anything unless you have proven your worth. To me, and to anyone from the Western society, this notion is completely backwards. And in case someone doesn't see the logic behind it, it's actually very simple. If you have achieved certain milestones in your professional career, say you've worked at a respectful company for many years, that means that you've overcome many obstacles, overstayed others who couldn't handle the pressure, and have learned from your mistakes and mistakes of others. That also means that your education is practical and not just formal. And as a result, you're perceived as a true subject matter expert and not someone who needs to prove their worth to each and every person along the way. So, moving on to the American folklore now. You might have heard a typical US business notion that a customer is always right. You see, the Americans are brought up in a business culture simply because it's a capitalist society. That's exactly why I'm using English to do these lectures. It's the language of business. So, customer is always right is not just a saying, it's a lifestyle. It's a mentality that kids are brought up with when they open their first lemonade stands, or if we look at most recent generation, it's in their online content that they produce now at an early age. It's all about demand and supply. A customer is right simply because without him, there would be no demand. So, your goal in sales is to assume a role of a consultant and not someone being bugged by stupid questions. That's how you create an atmosphere of trust to an American client anyways. So, today we've covered this key error in cultural translation. And like with any other error, it leads to another one. Criticizing and casting blame on a client. We're often facing challenging moments when we're forced to negotiate. Since we're not very good at it in this post-Soviet culture, we tend to automatically switch to a protection mode, where the first weapon seems to be blame. We start the war and naturally get an idea that we have to protect our side, an estimate given by our teammate, a timeline that changed unexpectedly, a personal lack of knowledge, and so on and so on. And find someone else to blame. That someone else is either someone we don't particularly like as a person at our company and can throw under the bus. Pre-sales did a bad job, sales have given an unrealistic estimate, a BA didn't do a good enough job on collecting technical specifications, and AM didn't do a good job on translating a message from the PM, and on and on and on. But sometimes it gets even worse. We blame a client. What's interesting is that it's simply considered rude and unacceptable in the US to come up with counter arguments in this particular case. So the war ends very quickly, and we can guess who the loser is here. Yes, naturally, the client chooses not to waste their time and end the relationship with you as soon as financially feasible. Yes, believe it or not, but people rarely remember what you've said, but they will always remember how you made them feel. Last but not least, I want to talk about one more cultural difference that stays in a way of successful relationship with an American client. And it's about assuming positive intent. See, in the US, at least in the most successful companies, when talking to a potential customer, or what they call an internal customer, meaning your colleague, it is natural and automated to always assume positive intent. That means if someone had made a mistake, for example, came to work late, you first lead with an assumption that he or she must be a victim of unforeseen circumstances. You let the person explain the situation and you adjust your reaction accordingly. As you've probably already guessed, in our culture here, and as well as in most European countries, it is an opposite reaction that is most common. And I completely understand it's due to history, especially the most recent one, when people have often been cheated on and lied to, often losing their entire life savings. So even though you may keep it as a cultural protection when dealing with your own people, you have no option but to switch to an American mindset of corporate culture, which is always assuming positive intent if you want to have a chance at securing a stable and healthy business relationship. Honestly, that is a better way of approaching any situation anyway. First, you find out and discover, assuming that things may not be as bad as they might seem, and even sometimes to your advantage. And then you make a decision on how to act. After all, in any successful partnership, both parties are always interested in achieving a common goal that is bigger than their individual efforts or ambitions. And that is the only way to get to a famous but often misunderstood concept of a win-win. As always, thank you for your time. I really appreciate your attention and care that you put into these lessons. As a small piece of homework, please share me your ideas or personal experience on other cultural differences, especially related to business ethics and leadership. Also, in another practical experience, please write an email to a potential client. I want to see how you approach asking the right questions and proposing a call. I'll give you a quick backstory here on a client. Hello, my name is Vitaly. I'm looking for a developer to build a POS system in one of my coffee shops. I checked your website, and it looks like you may have some experience on this type of work. Thank you. And that's it. Nice and simple. You take it from here. Hope to see you in the next one.